During the history of Israel, they had some very, very important treatment by God. They were the chosen people, and they enjoyed many, many blessings of God's care and His direction. One of the strange things about Israel, and I guess not so strange at the same time, is the fact that Israel drifted away from God and did not appreciate the things that God was doing for them. And they began thinking in terms, it seems, of, God doesn't really make any difference. It's just a sad thing to read the history of Israel along this line, particularly during the period that's called the divided kingdom. Also, the book of Judges has a great deal of this, but they wandered off into idolatry. They wandered off into all kinds of terrible, terrible sins. Finally, to the northern kingdom, after the division of the kingdom, the northern kingdom was finally taken captive by the Assyrians. The Assyrians were a very, very brutal people. The Assyrians are today's Iraqis. The country of Iraq is the ancient location of the ancient country of Assyria. And the capital of Assyria was Nineveh, of course. And Nineveh is right across the river, the Euphrates or the Tigris River, right across the river from the modern-day city of Mosul. And so you see, we're really involved in this area of the world still. Well, the Assyrians came into Samaria, the northern kingdom, and they took that kingdom captive. Like I say, they were brutal people, and their policy was, as they conquered various nations, they would disperse these people through the empire, and then they would intermarry in various areas of the empire, and so it broke down a spirit of nationalism. So, for example, if you were an Israelite and you were over in one of these conquered areas and you married there and so forth, you married to someone else who had been conquered from a different nation, you can see how that broke down the sense of unity and the sense of nationalism. And this was the policy of the Assyrian people, the Assyrian government. Now, that took place in 722 BC. The southern kingdom was a very bad kingdom also. They had a few good kings. Hezekiah was one of the most outstanding of the good kings. But it seems that right after a good king came his son, who turned out to be a very bad king. For example, Hezekiah's son was named Manasseh, and Manasseh turned out to be a terrible man. And he just led Judah off into terrible, terrible directions. It was downhill from there. During this time, the Assyrians they were conquered themselves, and the Babylonians arose. And now we have this great king of Babylon by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar, now stop and think of the Middle East now. Assyria and Babylon are basically close to being landlocked. The Persian Gulf is about the only outlet, that goes anywhere at all in the open sea. But they all wanted to get over into the area of Palestine because this opened all kinds of economic possibilities and military possibilities too. And so they were constantly trying to come over to Israel and conquer Israel, these ancient nations. Well, Babylon came in and put Israel under their own domination, and Israel paid they paid taxes to the Babylonians for a while, and then they decided we're not going to do that anymore. Now, The other part of the historical situation, which is extremely important, particularly in reference to this lesson, was that Egypt, of course, we know exactly where Egypt is. Egypt and Babylon were on opposite sides or opposite ends of the Fertile Crescent. If you remember, the Fertile Crescent kind of comes along like this, and you have Egypt here, and then you come on around here and you have Mesopotamia over here. Well, Egypt was the strongest nation on one end of the Fertile Crescent, and Babylon was the strongest nation on the other end of the Fertile Crescent, and they got into wars with each other. And so the Israelites are kind of caught in the middle of this. Israel, the people of Judah, really the southern kingdom, they were kind of a buffer state because the Babylonians would come over from the Euphrates, Mesopotamian area. They would come over and they would battle with Syria and then battle with Israel and with Judah. And there were all kinds of problems with this. Now, stop and think of this. You are a Jew. You live in Judea, Jerusalem, and around, and Egypt is just a little bit to the south. There are threats that the Babylonians are going to come in again and make war. A man by the name of Jeremiah was a prophet at this time, and Jeremiah warned them, don't seek help from Egypt. You have been evil, you've been wicked, God is going to punish you, and part of that punishment is you're going to be carried as captives over into Mesopotamia. Well, some of the people resigned themselves to this, but others said, "Oh no, we're not going to listen to Jeremiah at all. We're going to go down to Egypt." Isaiah warned against this idea of taking counsel outside of God Himself. In the 31st chapter of Isaiah, Isaiah says this. He says, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, who rely on horses, who trust in multitudes of their chariots and in the great strength of their horsemen, but do not look to the Holy One of Israel or seek help from the Lord." Now, this was said quite a while earlier than the Babylonian captivity. But there's something here that is very, very important. The tendency of a nation, our nation included, the tendency of a nation is to put a great deal of confidence in its military might, its military strength. And so nations build up their military power. There's certainly nothing against this. Israel had a fine army. David was a great soldier, a great warrior, and so forth. And certainly God expected them to defend themselves. But what happened so much of the time, and this is exactly what happened with the people of Judah, what happened was that in their thinking of their own security and providing for their own security, they lost touch with the idea of ethics and morality. In addition to that, and what really lent itself to that, was they became pagans themselves. They became very idolatrous. And the idolatry of that day was of such nature that it advocated, quite literally, it advocated immorality of some of the grossest descriptions. And so Israel has already been taken captive by Assyria, 722 BC, and now about 584, 85, right in through there. Now Judah is threatened by Babylon, and Jeremiah has warned these people, you're going to have to go into Babylonian captivity, and you're going to have to suffer for the things that you've done. Now, The Bible doesn't tell us about this, but it's a very interesting thing that archaeologists have discovered. There was an archaeological discovery back roughly 100 years ago, and it was called the Babylonian Chronicle. And in the Babylonian Chronicle, there was a systematic description of a lot of the events that were taking place just about this time among the Babylonians. And there's an account there of a battle between Babylon and Egypt that was taking place, or that took place rather, about the time of Jeremiah. Guess who won? The Egyptians won. And the Babylonians had to run back home. Well, now, you're a Jew. You're in Jerusalem there. And you're thinking, what shall I do? Shall I stay here in Jerusalem and take a chance on being captured by the Babylonians and carried as a captive? Or will I take refuge in Egypt? And Jeremiah told the people, do not go to Egypt. Don't go to Egypt. Isaiah had prophesied about some of these things also, and he also told, he pronounced, described in a very evil way the people and what they did. In the third, I just read to you from the 31st chapter of Isaiah. Here's a statement also from the 30th chapter of Isaiah. He says, "Woe to the obstinate children, declares the Lord, to those who carry out plans that are not mine, forming an alliance, but not by my spirit, heaping sin upon sin, who go down to Egypt without consulting me, and who look for help in Pharaoh's protection and Egypt's shade of refuge." Well, Isaiah was warning them, your future is not with Egypt. And yet they ignored God's statement there from Jeremiah and also from Isaiah. They just ignored it. Why? Well, because we need protection ourselves. As if to say, God is not capable of protecting us. Now, like I said a moment ago, the Bible doesn't teach that it's wrong for nations to have armies. David had a big army, and David did more conquering than any other king of Israel during its entire history. And yet, there's such a thing here as losing sight of the things that God commands and losing sight of the things that God advises us about. So, what is the attitude of these people? God called them rebellious. Now, I don't like to think of myself as a rebellious person, and you probably don't like to think of yourself as a rebellious person. But the question comes up, where is my trust? What do I really trust in? Where is the focal point in my life of where I gain my security and my strength? Now, God was willing to protect Israel, but Israel was not willing to accept God's protection because it didn't suit them. They felt insecure in the promises of God, and so as Jeremiah spoke to them, sometime they would say, oh, we've got to listen to Jeremiah. And then Jeremiah did not give them a very good, he didn't give them a very good report. And Jeremiah did not encourage them in their way of life, in paganism. On the other hand, there were some false prophets around. And these false prophets came around and said, oh, God, you'll take care of us. Nothing going to happen. Nothing bad going to happen at all. God's going to take care of us. We are God's people. Nothing bad is going to happen to us. And so the people believed these false prophets instead of believing in what Jeremiah had to say. This was the attitude that the people had. And that attitude said, we will trust in our own counsel rather than going to God. So when this whole thing of the help of Egypt came along. How can Egypt help? Well, Egypt just defeated the Babylonians, didn't they? Now, in the Bible, there's another story of a battle between Egypt and Babylon, and in that battle, Babylon won. And so you can see the way the people were torn between these two. I want protection for myself. I want protection for my family. I want security for myself and for my family. So what am I going to do? Am I going to listen to Jeremiah, who says, don't go down to Egypt, and yet I have in my mind, Egypt is close, Egypt is secure, Egypt is strong. And so many of the people turn toward Egypt. There's some admonitions in the Bible about this whole idea of our trust. This is not an easy topic for us. It's not an easy subject for us at all. We just have a hard time trusting in the invisible. We can't see God, and it's so much easier to trust in the military might or whatever it might be in things and people that we can see, and things that stand logically. They stand up logically. And so when the Bible talks about trusting in God, that is a very difficult thing for us to do. I will trust in God up to a point, but then I got to take things in my own hands. For example, James chapter 4, James says this, "Now listen, you who say this, today or tomorrow we'll go into this city or that city and we'll spend a year there and we'll carry on business and we'll make money." You don't know what's going to be on the morrow. What is your life? You're just a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. And then he said, instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. That's such an easy statement to read. It's such an easy concept for us to understand. A very difficult thing for us to practice. A very difficult thing for us to do. It seems that small defeats become major obstacles for us sometime in reference to this thing of trust. James says, this is what you ought to think in terms of. And then there's one of the great parables of Christ is found in Luke chapter 12. And in Luke chapter 12, Jesus makes an opening statement that's it's a killer, folks. It really is a killer, especially in a materialistic society like you and I live in. Jesus says, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of the things that he possesses. Oh, I'm going to spend my money for this. I'm going to buy that. I'm going to do this. And so forth. And we gather all of these things. And so, have you seen the bumper sticker a long time ago? The one who died with the most toys is the winner. You remember that? Something like that? Well, the whole idea is I need to accumulate. I need to get things. I see something that I want, I need to buy it. If somebody else has a better one, I need to buy a better one. And so we're so very strongly materialistic. And so Jesus said, hey, listen, life is not made up of what you possess. We are the richest nation on earth. We have, in so many respects, we have the highest standard of living of any nation really in the history of the world. And so we are materially greatly blessed. And yet, if we're not careful, we find ourselves trusting so deeply in these things that we're like this, what we call the rich fool, because Jesus called him a fool. Oh, there was a man who he was a farmer. And boy, one year he had bumper crops, Jesus says. He just I don't have enough barn space to store these things. And so I said, what am I going to do? Oh, I know what I'll do. He said, the first thing I'm going to do, all my barns, I'm going to tear them all down. And I'm going to build big barns. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to gather all my harvest in. And I'm going to sit back and I'm going to say, boy, Jack, you've got it made. You've just got it made. Live life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Well, Jesus said of this man, said, you're a fool. Because you're going to die tonight. Isn't it sad that we spend so much of our time, so much of our energy, so much of our thought, so much of our action accumulating things. And then one day we're going to die and we leave it to somebody else. Oh yes, I want to leave as much as I can to my children because I love them. I want them to have things, you know. I want them to have things. And that's just kind of the way we think. One of my sons told me, he said, Dad, said, what I want you to do is to spend all the money you have, to spend the last dollar the day you die. Said, I don't want you to leave us anything. I want you to enjoy it. Well, the way I'll enjoy it, of course, is being able to pass something down to them. But what I'm trying to say is that so much of the time, our trust is in things. And it's so hard not to trust in things. I know what I'm talking about, and you do too. Because, well, Ira North used to say, fathers talk to their sons about getting better jobs. And he said his son wanted to drop out of high school. And he said, no, son, don't drop out of high school. Go ahead and finish your high school. Why, Dad? You'll make more money. And then when he finished his high school, he didn't want to go to college. His father said, son, go to college, get a degree. Why? Well, you make more money. And then when he graduated from college, he wanted to pursue kind of a non-lucrative thing. And his father said, don't pursue that, pursue this. Why, Father? Because you make more money. Now, I realize that that's a great exaggeration, but I also realize that there's a little kernel of truth in this because we think so much in terms of our money, things that we possess. So what is it here that the Bible teaches us about trust? Matthew chapter 13, Jesus gave us two parables there, he gave a number of parables. The two I want to mention as we close. The parable of the pearl of great price and the parable of the hidden treasure. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a man who found a treasure in a field. And so he went immediately and bought that field. Well, that doesn't mean very much to us the way we act today. But if a person had something very, very valuable, what he would do, he would dig a hole out in the field somewhere, bury the treasure and cover it up, and then later he could go back to it. But the thing was, a lot of times people died, and the man has never told anybody about where the treasure was. And so sometime when people bought fields, they would find out there's a buried treasure in that field. And that's the picture of what Jesus is talking about right here. So this man, he knows there's a great treasure here. And he goes and he buys that field in order to capture that treasure. And then Jesus told the parable, very similar to this, of the pearl of great price. One of the things I like about the pearl of great price is that here was a man who is seeking goodly pearls, the Bible says, beautiful pearls. And he found one pearl that was very, very valuable. And he saw the potential in that pearl. And the Bible says he went and sold everything he had so he could buy that pearl. Why? Because there's a value in that pearl that was greater than anything he could imagine of his own possessions. Now, Jesus says that that's the kingdom. And this is a lesson in the power of faith, the power of trust. When we come to the point that we see the kingdom of God, we see Christ, the King, we see his rulership in our lives as such a valuable thing that we're willing to sell everything we have to gain that. There's a power in that surpasses all kinds of collection of material things. Now, are material things wrong? No. Did you know that Abraham was a very wealthy man? Jacob was an extremely wealthy man. If you want to see that, go back and read the story of Jacob coming back from Syria, coming back into Palestine, and the gift that he gave to his brother Esau. It'll kind of blow your mind. Hundreds and hundreds of animals simply as a peace offering, a gift to Esau. It shows something about the wealth of the man. There's nothing wrong with wealth. But there is something wrong when that becomes the driving force in our lives. And so the Bible teaches us, way back yonder in reference to the captivities in Israel and Egypt and so forth, the Bible teaches us that we have to learn to trust in God and in God's promises. And sometimes this goes contrary to all kinds of things in our lives. And sometimes it's challenged in so many ways. And in the New Testament, we have such stories as this, that I mentioned, the pearl of great price, the hidden treasure, the rich fool. We had these things to show us the contrast between trusting in riches, trusting in things, trusting in prosperity, trusting in advancement, trusting in jobs, trusting in the material things, to the neglect of our trust in the promises of God. God doesn't tell us, trust in me, you don't have to work. Trust in me, you don't have to prepare. That isn't the idea at all. But the idea is, what is at the center of your life? What is at the center of your life, the focal point of the whole thing? For the Jews at the time of Jeremiah, for those people, it was my own personal security. And God had promised security to those who trusted him and followed his counsel. That wasn't good enough for them. And so they, quite literally, they kidnapped Jeremiah, made him a prisoner of themselves, and they carried him down to Egypt. And the book of Jeremiah closes with this terrible incident. And so Jeremiah was a victim of the people that he was trying to instruct in learning to trust in God. So the help of Egypt turned out to be a great hindrance and a great curse to some of the people of Judah.